I hate to be the one to tell you this, but spooky season is officially over.
Let's start an end, come on, man.
Which means it's now time for Christmas! That's right, Halloween is officially over. All of those decorations have been put away for the year to gather dust, which arguably makes them just a little bit more spooky. But it's time to move on. And yet, I find it hard to. I feel like despite all of the Halloweeniness of this year, I haven't gotten enough. I need just a little bit more time. If only there were some sort of franchise that tackled both Halloween and Christmas. Well, that's exactly what we're gonna do today. I'm the Thesterninator, but my friends call me Stern, and welcome to the channel. Today, we're doing just that, and taking on Nightmare Before Christmas as Pokémon. A little background. The Nightmare Before Christmas was a stop-motion film directed by Tim Burton.
Nope.
That's actually a common misconception. Tim Burton didn't direct this project. He did write it alongside Michael McDowell, but this film was directed by Henry Selick, who also worked on Wendell and Wild, Coraline, and James and the Giant Peach. For those of you keeping track at home, that is the second James and the Giant Peach reference in 2 videos, so mark your tally boards, we've almost got a bingo. The story examines Jack Skellington, the Pumpkin King, as he struggles with boredom over running Halloween. Eventually, he stumbles into Christmas Town and discovers Christmas! Sally the Ragdoll attempts to stop him, but to no avail. Unfortunately, the denizens of Halloween Town, not that one, don't quite have the skills required to meet the demands of a Christmas Festivus.
A Festivus for the rest of us!
Chaos ensues, lessons are learned, a spin-off video game is made, Jack meets Sora, and all is set right.
Or is it?
You see, as mentioned, Jack has met Sora. And Sora is in Smash. You know who else is in Smash? Pikachu. So it stands to reason that there not being a Jack Skellington, Selly, Oogie Boogie, or Zero-based Pokemon is an injustice and one that I can no longer stand for. So, without much further ado, let's hop into our first Pokemon. Starting off with Jack, you have to take in not just the design of the character, but their story as well. And I don't mean the story I just ran us through. I mean the story of how and why this Pokemon had to, needed to, or wanted to grow. It's almost like looking backwards at the timeline, knowing where you're going and reverse engineering the design from there. In this case, we're going to get to
Jack, the Pumpkin King!
But where do we start? I thought of this idea of a wandering skull-headed spirit that would eventually come into power, but for the moment is just this lost little guy, dressed in rags, looking for a place to fit in. He doesn't have that debonair quality to him requiring a suit and tie, but instead is less than. We also already have a few floating ghost types, and yes, he will be ghost type. I wanted to find a way to make this one stand out just a bit. I went with this little tail that almost felt torn at the end. More like fabric than the wisps that we see in Pokemon like Mismagius or Ghastly. I also found while designing all of our Pokemon today that there were a few design elements that carried over across the Pokemon outside of their respective lines. I feel like that kind of works, as each of the characters in this story are somehow connected to one another. Halloween Town isn't this vast and glorious sprawling city, but a small, close-knit community. So it kind of makes sense that these creatures, ghouls, and goblins would all share some aspects with one another. Look at regional variants, for example. Pokemon change depending on their regions, but Pokemon native to the same region will often have similar features, like the sharp and angular points of the Kanto region, or the more sleek and smooth Pokemon of Hoenn, or Paldea with the, well, you get the idea. So having matching aesthetics works here in a fun and interesting way. And so this is Spectyke, a play on Spectre and Tyke, meaning a young kid. For the shiny, I went with this pumpkin type of aesthetic that we'll see throughout this line, kind of referencing the beginning of the movie where Jack is disguised as a scarecrow with a pumpkin head. He's not very big and, like I said before, is a pure ghost type, and while his stats leave a lot to the imagination, we're gonna get there eventually. Something that I'm really excited about is actually the growth and story of this Pokemon. Story of evolution isn't exactly something I've tackled a ton of in this channel, but I always think it's interesting and it's always something that just exists in the back of my mind and I just truthfully forget to bring up. But speaking of story, this little guy isn't finished yet. I looked at Jack and how I might see his place in the world of Halloween Town evolving from this sad, meandering spirit into something like a schoolboy type, all prior to him becoming the king of Halloween, of course. So I wanted this more pranky type of vibe, not so much a bully as much as, well, an overachiever in the school of scaring, let's say. Expanding on the previous iteration, he now has legs. Wispy as they may be, those are legs. The most difficult part for me was the mouth. Figuring out how to emulate the skull stitch concept, but in a purposeful and stylized manner. The design of Jack's face is pretty simple and iconic and is essentially what's kept Hot Topic in business all these years. So it had to evoke the idea of Jack while also being its own thing. I went with these connected lines throughout that also drew inspiration from inventors and phrenologists, scientists who study the skull. I think for a more schoolboy-inspired design, that concept plays well. It also makes it feel like he were stitched or unstitched. The top part of his skull would make an excellent candy bucket. But I'm also hoping that we can start to see some of the more intrinsic parts of his costume design. His suit is slowly coming into focus and he's gaining an air of confidence about him that Jack is known for. In the film, Jack gets down on himself and second guesses his motives, but never loses that confidence. When he laments his ruining of Christmas later in the film, it's not because he's embarrassed or a failure, but because his idea just plain didn't work. And he quickly pivots to a new solution, just making Halloween bigger and better. Jack ultimately is an idea man, one with a good head on his shoulders, unless he decides to take it off and recite Shakespearean quotation. And so I introduce to you Skeddington, a play on skedaddle, skellington, and skeleton, of course. The shiny is once again that orangish, pumpkinish vibe as the Pumpkin King. He's grown a little bit in stature as well as power, still that solid ghost type though, and a very fun design. I can picture him kind of floating through the halls of an abandoned school dorm and just wreaking havoc. He's a fun little dude, and I would love to have him on my team, but truth is, we're not done yet. He still has further to go and more to evolve into, which we'll get into in just a second. Before we can fully evolve our Skeddington, we need to take a look at the characters who get Jack to that place. The most forefront of them being Sally. In the movie, Sally is often overlooked, even locked away by Dr. Finkelstein. So I wanted a design that mimicked this shy and unfinished kind of look. A problem that I faced was that less than a month ago, I did the Amazing Digital Circus as Pokémon, and Ragatha fits a lot of the same design elements as Sally. Both are based on ragdolls, both are kind of the caretaker to their respective groups, and both are redheads. So I wanted to look at some aspects of the ragdoll archetype, especially those specific to Sally, while conjuring up this Pokémon. Something Sally has that Ragatha doesn't is that she herself is a seamstress. She makes her own clothes and stitches herself back together when she either falls apart or pulls herself apart to convey some master plan. So I took those ideas and ran with them, thinking that I could take them from the structure of the human body. I decided that since she is an unfinished product, I not give her any arms, allowing her long and flowy hair to function as makeshift hands. She also has this dress, which is actually pants, to play up that this is an early form of the Pokemon, and therefore needs some room to play. They function almost as little kid overalls, ill-fitting hand-me-downs, which I really think fit the Sally vibe. For her face, I went with this soft and compassionate, albeit a little ditzy, of an expression. She's a soft and loving character, who pursues Jack despite him never really seeing her. Maybe this Pokemon itself is longing after Skeddington. I call her Forsol, a play on the name For Sale. Forsol is a normal fairy type, playing up the idea that Sally is an optimist. She sees the brighter side of things, even when she has these terrible visions that things will go astray. Her power levels aren't quite where they could be, but don't worry, she will evolve and she will come into her own eventually. For her shiny, I went with this just kind of inverted color scheme, something that plays up that she is a mismatch of parts, that some things just don't match up. For her size, she's very small, playing up the idea that she is just a doll, and yeah, that's her. Really, really liking Forcel. Let me know if you want her on your team. Also, as I often do with these videos, let me know what you think about abilities. These Pokemon are very interesting and specific and different from what I normally do, so I'm curious what you guys come up with down in the comments. The idea here is growth. Change. As Forcel grows and learns friendship from her trainer and other Pokemon around her, she's able to evolve. I wanted to utilize a lot of the base Sally shape, while still building on what was established in the previous design. I knew that I wanted her to be a more human-looking Pokemon without being too off-putting. So I played with some of the shape language to get across a few ideas and, honestly, to forego some obstacles. The first was what to do with her hair hands. I ended up just dropping them completely and going for something more flowy. I know what that sounds like. It sounds like I just kind of gave up and decided not to do it, but hear me out on this. It really flows with the story and the character's growth and change throughout their evolution. Whenever I do drop something for, okay, I'm not going to do that anymore, true, sometimes it is because, well, that's just going to be too complicated, but other times it's because aspects of it aren't needed anymore. In the aspects of Sally where the hair hands were, it was because she was a small toddler, playful, utilizing her hands to grab rocks and throw them or play with hoops and sticks or whatever it is that kids do nowadays. I'm not really sure. I picture that she's still able to make her hair into those big punchy fists that I love to put on Pokemon, especially ones with pigtails, but she prefers to wear it down when not in combat, giving her an almost ghostly-like appearance as she floats around the towns and cities of her region. The sprigs of hair that flare out on the sides also give that illusion that she walks with a dainty step, arms outward for balance. One of my favorite parts of this design are the mismatched eyelashes. I think they give a lot of personality to an otherwise kind of dull face. Maybe that's not the right word. She's still a very soft-spoken character and prefers to let others have the spotlight, but no longer is it out of obligation or habit, but because she has gained an internal confidence without need of outside validation. God, I wish that were me. While the film focuses on Jack, Sally goes through a transformation of her own for acceptance. Not of the world she inhabits like Jack does, but instead, her transformation of acceptance is about accepting herself, showcased in her no longer needing to run from her creator. I'm sure there's a larger metaphor there, but for the moment, that's just kind of what it's going to be. It's a journey of freedom by one's own volition. And so Forcel evolves into Forseam, a play on the term for, meaning before, and seam, meaning seam. Forseam. Its power has now gotten a big bump and it's still normal fairy type, and for its shiny, again, just kind of that mismatched color scheme. Like I said in the previous design, there's a lot of aspects of the different characters that carry through into one another. In this instance, we can see that the Jack Skellington type of character went from having no legs to having legs. This one went from having legs to having no legs. They complete each other. It's a circle. I also changed the stitching between the drawing and the rendering to be red. I pictured her almost using her own hair as the threading, since Sally is kind of a use what you got type of person. You'll also see some fun stuff with the way that the dress top and bottom separate with the next design. Oogie Boogie is the titular villain of The Nightmare Before Christmas, and an absolute classic at that. Disney even has a whole show around this specific character during Halloween time called Oogie Boogie Bash, so he has persisted in the public eye since the initial movie release. The Nightmare Before Christmas boasts an inspiring cast, with Ken Page lending his voice to Oogie Boogie. Page sadly passed away earlier this year, but he will always be remembered for his portrayal of Halloween Town's baggy boogeyman. I knew that I wanted to do a two-stage line, so I focused on Pokemon like Mimikyu and Wobbuffet, where the Pokemon you see isn't the actual Pokemon. As you know, Mimikyu's actual self is not the Pikachu-like face scribbled across the face, but the shadow hidden underneath, and Wobbuffet has a theory, which I don't know if it's been proven or not, let me know in the comments, that the tail is the actual face of the Pokemon and the body is much more a punching bag. Thus, the punching bag motif, I guess. But that's Oogie Boogie's whole bag, isn't it? That in reality he's not this towering burlap menace that he appears to be, but merely a collection of insects puppeteering a larger body. So to stick with that idea and combine this bag with worms, I used the bag worm. I know, we're not unfamiliar with the bagworm in Pokemon, with such creations as Wormadam and Fortress, but I wanted to go much more literal in this sense, creating a seemingly happy little Halloween sack that hides a devious little worm inside. Almost on the idea of having your Halloween candy, going about the neighborhood, finishing up, getting every little ounce of king-size bar that you could find, opening it only to find it full of worms. That is a trick-or-treating nightmare. It's like if Bonsley got termites, but like the rock-eating kind. I'm really losing my metaphors here, mixing them up, sorry about that. But anyway, this is Goodie Bag. Goodie Bag is a play on the term goodie bag. He's also good, because look, he's happy. Unless, no, that happy smiling face is merely the coil up of the bug that lives inside of it. For its shiny, I went with this more purpley, kind of ghostly type of vibe, despite the fact it's not a ghost type. It's a pure bug type. Not very powerful, but it does evolve, which we'll get into in just a second. For its size, it is the perfect size for a great big bag of candy, as most of us have probably seen a dozen of on Halloween recently, but what it's going to turn into is hopefully not something you got to see very recently. When Mr. Oogie Boogie says there's trouble close at hand, you'd better pay attention, because this is our boogeyman. I wanted to continue that zombified body type of aesthetic we were hitting, and so I made this big, hulking body base with plenty of opportunity for those buggy bits to snake their way through. This is a villain after all, so it had to be menacing in a number of ways, from the cold, dead eyes to the hacked away mouth to the torn hole at the top of the bag that is now way too small for the insects inside to burrow out from. They've been eating greedily. On what? That's for you to decide. But this insect, the true Pokemon, has grown in size and number, and had to find new ways to escape its baggy confines. As such, it tore open the sides of the bag to reveal itself as a set of two snake-like arms, designed to function as pocket knives would to tear open feed bags, which, hey, are made of burlap, much like Oogie Boogie. I also mentioned that each of these designs is connected to another in some way. The tiny little fabric tear at the end of this Pokemon emulates the torn fabric of Spectike, while its gaping maw as a mouth almost reflects Fourseem's dress separation. Its faux eyes are mere imitations that I'm sure in the moonless night may appear as a wandering and scared Spectike, but in reality, that is only to lure in foolish trainers, so that they may get close enough to become enveloped in this monstrosity. It treats the bag almost like a storage compartment, where it can house whatever it wants to eat later. I like this idea because it makes me think of how a lot of bugs in nature will do this. Hives are storage facilities for honey, where bees keep their nutrients. And other animals do the same. Ants will do this with taking sugar back to their den so that they can feed on it whenever they need and help supply the queen with energy. And there's seemingly this symbiotic relationship between these three Pokemon. Skeddington and Fourseem, they may not like this guy, but in the business of scaring, there's truly no one better. And while he may not like his other two counterparts, it's his imitation of them that allows him to feed. He very much has an insect-type way of survival. I just hope that nothing happens that gets the others on his bad side.
How dare you treat my friends so shamefully!
Well, I guess it was all good while it lasted. And so, Goodie Bag evolves into Boogie Bag. Getting a big bump in its power, it's now Bug Dark type, and just for a second, can we look at that shiny? I'm not one who says, hey, just make the shiny cool, but this is a cool shiny. I just decided to go with a black bag, as well as changing the bugs to have this eerie greenish ectoplasmic glow to them, and I am so happy I did. I'm not a shiny hunter, but if this were real, I'd shiny hunt this thing for days. I'm tooting my own horn. I made this thing, so I know, but it's very cool. Can we just acknowledge that it's cool? Black, silver, green, very cool. You can see by the size that it has grown tremendously in stature. No longer is it this little goodie bag style size and shape. It's now a towering behemoth. But who could possibly take out this behemoth, you may ask? The Nightmare Before Christmas is ultimately a movie about growth, and what happens when we refuse that growth. Jack thinks that he needs to grow in business and reach, making Halloween something exciting by changing it completely. But finds that he needs to grow on the inside. He needed to accept the others around him as counterparts and not just associates. Sally grows in gaining her freedom, not by asking for it or by stealing it, but by proving to herself that she's worth being free. Together, Sally and Jack are able to grow into an acceptance of each other by first learning to accept themselves. The other side of that coin is Oogie Boogie, who can't grow and refuses to. He's a monster in a town built to scare, and that's all he'll ever be. He's fine with the complacency because he's good at it. So while everyone outside tries, unsuccessfully, to adapt, he remains a monster, turning himself and ultimately exploding. Like an Ouroboros, a snake eating its own tail. He can't grow outward, he can't grow inward, and so he just stays. In the end, for Oogie Boogie, who wanted to be bigger than Jack himself, but without learning or growing, he ends up being revealed to be no more than a literal parasite. We should feel allowed to fail. That's how we learn, and how we get better. I'm asked how to draw and where to learn certain techniques a lot, and the answer is, I failed. A lot. I made mistakes, and hopefully, I'll continue to make more. Because if video games have taught me anything, it's that when things get harder, it usually means you're going the right direction. This final form of our Jack Skellington Pokemon is a testament to what can be made when we build upon ourselves by those around us. And just as important, when we build upon ourselves by what we tell ourselves. His design is big, it's tall, it's proud, and it takes into account everything that makes Jack Skellington Jack Skellington. But I don't know, I feel like it couldn't get there without the other Pokemon we designed along the way. I actually designed everything first and this one last, because I wanted to feel inspired by what else could come from this franchise. Before I even get to explaining this Pokemon, I want to thank user on YouTube, Godzilla7595, for suggesting Nightmare Before Christmas in our last video, and the video before that, I always had intentions of tackling this one, but to have someone request it was really cool. And I'm not saying that just because you request something in the comments means it's going to happen, but heading over to our Discord and being a part of the community definitely helps. That's linked down in the description below. We recently did a poll which led to us making our last video, which was Poppy Playtime. I had a ton of fun on that. I know nothing about Poppy Playtime prior to the video. I know a lot about it now. Not a ton, not everything, but it was a lot of fun. But regardless, this is Skalumpking, a play on skeleton, pumpkin, and king. Skalumpking has a pretty good stat spread, I'd like to think. It is a pure ghost type still, and that shiny still takes inspiration from that orange pumpkin king type of vibe, while still throwing in some purple this time. I just thought it was fun and really mimicked the costume that he wears at the beginning of the movie. He now towers over the trainer, a little bit taller than they are by about a foot, foot and a half, and I think is just the type of thing to take on an Oogie Boogie based Pokemon.
But wait! There's more!
We can't talk about all of the people who made Jack into who he is without taking into consideration his faithfulest companion, the one by his side from the very beginning. Without Zero, Jack never would have even discovered Christmas Town, nor been able to fly through the fog. What more can be said about Zero that hasn't already? I didn't include the jack-o'-lantern nose because I wanted to keep this design simple and grounded to as close as I could to the actual Zero the dog. We have mob boss dogs, hellhounds, ghosts, skeletons, but none could ever replace Zero.
So don't even try.
I could go into the reasoning why this Pokemon needed to be created, or the motifs behind the decisions I made, but what's the point? He's a ghost dog, and a good boy, so he deserves to be here. And so here he is in all of his glory. This is Zero. The name was already so perfect, so I just left it as is, because this one's kind of just for me. The stats aren't anything to write home about, but that's okay, because he's more a companion than he is a fighter anyway. He's a normal ghost type, being that he's just your average sheet ghost as a dog. For the shiny, I went with that ectoplasmic green that I love to throw on our ghost types, And yeah, if you want to see more Pokemon like this, you can always catch us over on the Discord down below. I post all of these images as resources the day after a video comes out. And you can find on Patreon where I'm going to be doing polls for our Wednesday videos as well. We did a Poppy Playtime recently, and that was a ton of fun. But with all that said, it sounds like you know where to find me, and I'll catch you in the next one. Bye!